Well, good morning, everyone. Please open your New Testaments to Mark chapter 14. And pretty soon we'll get that up on the screen. I still can't get over how fast the year is going, mostly because I had to mow my yard yesterday. It's way too early to have to do that. Anyway, thank you all for being with us, visitors especially. All of you who are normally here, most lovingly, and those who are joining us on Zoom, thank you for streaming with us this morning. We're continuing, as you can tell, our study of the life of Jesus as it's recorded for us in the Gospel of Mark. And as we said last month, we are in the final hours of Jesus' life on earth prior to his crucifixion. Where we are today is the disciples have celebrated the Passover. They're gone to Gethsemane. We covered last month the tremendous suffering that he endured there. And we submit to you that his prayer to God has been answered. And his hour has come. The title of our lesson today is The Betrayal and Arrest of Jesus. It's disconcerting to think that he had to go through that. Obviously, one of the focal points of the lesson is going to be Judas. Though Winston Churchill didn't say this about him, it very much applies that he's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. I can't figure him out. How could a person who was with Jesus 24/7 for almost 3 years, seeing his miracles and hearing his teaching and witnessing his heart and his loving concern for others, how could he do what he did? How can a person be that evil, that wicked, that callous, that self-serving? And of course, behind Judas is the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of the Jews, and they are mostly united in their desire that Jesus be killed. They hated him. They were jealous of his popularity. They did not like his condemnation of their hypocrisy, and most recently their public humiliation that he gave to them when he cleansed the temple. But as much as they want him dead, they know they have to be shrewd. They know they have to be careful. According to Matthew's account in chapter 26 and verse 5, they wanted him put to death, but they wanted to wait till after the feast to do that. Unfortunately, they are not on their own schedule. They're on God's schedule. They are going to have to do this at night so that there won't be any crowds, there won't be any possibility of riots, and they need him to be pointed out in less than ideal light conditions if you're doing it at night. And you can just see, boy, the perfect person for this would be one of his 12 apostles, but that would be too much to hope for. Then we saw earlier in this chapter, in chapter 14 and verse 10, that Judas, one of the 12, is going to do exactly that. We learn in other passages that he chose to do that, agreed to do that for 30 pieces of silver. And so Judas has been looking all of this time for an opportunity to fulfill that. Again, they've had their Passover. Judas was there initially, but he left. The Passover is going to last between 4 and 6 hours. Jesus, before he leaves, lets Judas know, I know what you're going to do. The rest of the apostles are clueless about that. Judas knows where Jesus is going to go after the Passover. Jesus knows where he's going to go, and he knows Judas knows, and he's going there. It's a perfect setup for Judas. It's nighttime. It's outside of the city. There has been plenty of time for him to get everybody together, and Jesus is going to see them coming. And as we finished up last week in Mark chapter 14 and verse 42, Jesus says, "Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." And so let's read our text this morning, which is verses 43 through 52. Don't pay attention to the screen. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. The men seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Am I leading a rebellion," said Jesus, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled." Then everyone deserted and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. I will tell you, I started to say the lesson is going to be short, and I took 2 pages of my outline away, and it would have even been shorter than it's going to be. There's not a lot to cover here. I just want us to be able to picture this and see what's going on and understand any kinds of applications that we could make as we go through this. And so what we have here is Judas and the mob arriving at the Garden of Gethsemane. And apparently, just as verse 42 says, just as he was speaking in verse 43. And what he was speaking was, "Let's go, my betrayer has come." It tells me that Jesus was praying to the very last moment. He waited until they were almost upon them. And then once again it says Judas, one of the 12. That was stated earlier in verse 10. And I think we're told that he's one of the 12 to emphasize the unbelievable circumstance that one of Jesus' closest disciples, chosen apostles, would be doing this. And again, we would ask, well, how in the world can he do that? Luke 22 and verse 3 says that Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. Behind Judas, behind the Sanhedrin, is Satan. He's behind all of this. And Jesus made the statement later in Luke 22, "Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me, but this is your hour, when darkness reigns." As you recall, Judas had left the supper early. He had to go tell the chief priests that this is the time, the Sanhedrin. They had to get permission from the Romans to get soldiers. And this is not a small mob that's arriving here. John's account, or the writer of the Gospel of John, said, "So Judas came to the garden guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons." This is not a small group. The detachment of soldiers there is that Greek word speira, and it means a tenth of a legion. Some of your translations may even have a cohort. A cohort is 600 soldiers. Have you ever pictured that many people up here? 600 plus Judas, plus the temple police, plus anybody else that's there. And listen, this is typical Roman overkill. They're going to mount numbers, masses of numbers that you cannot overcome, because the Romans took rebellion seriously. They had already had one very recently. Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city. They have extra soldiers in Jerusalem during the Passover, Pentecost, and other feast days, and there are plenty there, and they do not want a rebellion. So they're ready. And all of this extra is going on in the background as far as Mark is concerned. Judas left, but this is what's going on while he's gone. So the soldiers come, and the crowd, they are armed with swords. That's the Greek word is machera, which is the typical short sword of the Romans. They also come with clubs. And that's actually just from the Greek word that means tree, zulon, X-U-L-O-N. We would call them clubs. We would call them bats. In fact, it's probably what was carried by the temple police that you have maybe had heard referred to as billy clubs. They also have torches and lanterns. Again, back to John 18:3, they were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. They have to be able to see. It's dark. They have to see their path. And it's a mob, as Mark points out, from the Sanhedrin, from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And of course, Judas is in the lead. And Judas is in the lead because they need him to give a positive identification of who Jesus is. See, their assumption is that he's going to try to escape. Maybe even that someone else would step up and say, I'm Jesus, in the dim light or whatever, and could pull it off for a little while, and Jesus could escape. Again, that's the reason for the size of this force. But Judas is going to identify him, and that was previously stated, that he's going to do that by kiss. Now, the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Listen, kissing was and is still in this part of the world, that part of the world, a common form of greeting. Slaves kissed their master's feet. Inferiors kissed the hands of the person they're greeting. Kissing on the cheek was a kiss that was shared among equals, and that's the kiss that Judas is going to give. And in fact, in verse 45, it says Judas kissed him, and going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. That is the Greek word kataphileo. Can you see what the last word is in that Greek word? Phileo. That's affection. That's brotherly love. That's the kiss is intended for that. The kata on the front of that means he kissed him fervently. He kissed him repeatedly. That same word is used in Luke 15 and verse 20 when the father meets the prodigal son, and at the end of it, he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. That's the kind of kiss that Judas gave Jesus. Just why Jesus in Luke 22:48 said, Judas, are you betraying the Son of God with a kiss? And almost like with a kiss like this? Again, remember that was all a part of the plan so that we got the right guy. Again, the idea is that Jesus would not be taken. He would want to escape. He'd want to melt into the crowd. But Jesus can identify and will identify himself. He's not trying to get away. He wants them to know who he is. After his interaction with Judas, Jesus is very definitely going to identify himself. And again, going back to the Gospel of John, you're familiar with this text. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," said Jesus, and Judas, a traitor, was standing there with them. Now, I purposefully italicized the he of "I am he" because it's not in the Greek. Who are you looking for? Jesus of Nazareth. I am. When Jesus said, "I am," they drew back and fell to the ground. And he asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they said. Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. If you're looking for me, then let these men go." Now, this first part here on this slide, they drew back and fell to the ground. I've always pictured, 10, 12, maybe 20 people falling back. How many people are here? Over 600. You ever seen any pictures of when Mount St. Helens blew and the fir trees are all laid, all in a line down the hillside? That's what you see here. Jesus says, "I am," boom. They all fall backwards. 600 plus of them. 6 times the number of people that are in this room right now. And just to make sure they understand, he asks them again, "Who is it you're looking for?" Again. They had the audacity to say Jesus of Nazareth, and he said, "I already told you, I am." What's just as impressive for me here is that Jesus then says, "Then okay, let the rest of these go." He's still thinking about his disciples. He's still protecting them. He's still looking out for them. And listen, when we go back to Mark's account of this, that's the last you'll hear of Judas or about Judas in this gospel. He disappears from the pages of Mark's gospel. And we know what happened to Judas. That's another sermon at another time. So Jesus is arrested. After all that happened, they seized Jesus and arrested him. And then we are told about the actions of a kind of impulsive, impetuous disciple here in verse 47. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. So Mark describes him as just one of those standing by. And listen, I think if we didn't have anything else, we'd probably guess who this impulsive, impetuous disciple is. But the Gospel of John clears that up for us. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear, even gives us the servant's name. The servant's name was Malchus. So why would Peter do that? Well, I can think of a couple of reasons. He said, if everybody else will fall away, I won't. He said, "I'll be willing to die for you." And it appears he's right. I mean, the odds are not great. One guy against 600 plus. So why would he do that? Why would he even draw his sword and do that? I think because he thought they'd win. What did Jesus just do? He said, "I am." What happened to all of those guys? They fell backwards. Let's get to it. That's Peter's idea. He thought they could win. And listen, if you don't remember anything else from this lesson, that was never a part of the plan. And Jesus had told them that. And it's still not a part of the plan. Christianity, if I can use that term, is never advanced by the sword. Think of all the times that that's been attempted. Bosnia, Northern Ireland, Lebanon, the Crusades. And in the minds of some, the United States today, with all of its military power, man, we're just going to spread Christianity everywhere. I mean, that was part of the Catholic idea of sending missionaries and teaching everybody and overpowering them with their might and their power. This is really simple. The cause of Christ advances one soul at a time on the basis of faith held in the heart of that one person. That's the plan. One person tells another about Jesus Christ. And not with a knife at their throat or a gun to their back or a sword. It's the gospel, is God's power to salvation. Romans chapter 1 and verse 16. It's not advanced politically. It's not advanced militarily. So in this huge melee, here's Malchus, and his ear has just been sheared off. And I've said before, Peter wasn't aiming for his ear. He wasn't trying to show how good a swordsman he was. He headed for his head. And Jesus just calmly reaches down, picks up the ear, puts it back on there, and it's just as good, if not better, than new. And having done that, listen, and I hadn't thought about that till this very second. The purpose of miracles is to confirm the word of the person speaking. And so now Jesus is going to address them. Maybe he has their attention. He should have had their attention when he knocked them over with one word. In verses 48 through 49, am I leading a rebellion, said Jesus? Am I like Barabbas? Are you putting me in his category here? That you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day, speaking of this week, every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. Listen, an insurrection, a rebellion, that's the only thing that would justify you being here with over 600 men and clubs and torches and swords to take me. And so why all the armed soldiers? Why the police? Were you expecting resistance? Coming in the middle of the night to capture me? Every day I was with you in the temple court. Why didn't you take me Monday? Right after I cleansed the temple. That would be a good idea. That'd be a good time to do that. At least you'd have a modicum of reason. Why not Tuesday? Why not Wednesday? Listen, he is just simply exposing the hypocrisy of their clandestine and the unlawful nature of what is going on right now. And we'll talk more about that next month. But he tells them there in verse 49b, I can tell you why you're doing this. Scripture must be fulfilled. And he admitted that this was the Father's will. And so at that point, his arrest is completed. John and John's gospel is going to tell us that they arrested him. That included binding him. They tied him up. That's John chapter 18 and verse 12. And they led him away. And listen, you're one of the disciples who see Jesus allowing that to happen. And so you read verse 50, then everyone deserted him and fled. They see the ugly crowd. They see Jesus giving in. And so they all left. They deserted and fled. They had to desert him. That's the only way they could flee. And that's what they want to do. And there's no one left behind. And Jesus had earlier said, you will all fall away. And the reason you knew that, because Zechariah 13 and verse 7 says, awake sword against my shepherd, against the man who is close to me, declares the Lord Almighty. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Now we come to the interesting part here, the unidentified person here in Mark 15, 51 and 52. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. So this is the closing scene of this. It's only found here in the Gospel of Mark. A young man wearing only a linen garment. It's all he has is just a linen thing wrapped around himself, and he's following Jesus. And as they're following him, and assume they're on their way, they seize him, grabbing the garment, and he just ran out of the garment and left naked. So who is this? Well, there's a lot of people that say it's Mark. And then they will give you a really long tale to try to show you, he's at home asleep, and now he hears all this commotion. He gets up and wraps a linen sheet around himself and goes up the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's there. That's all fiction. Others say it's someone else, and they'll give you just as much mythical information that you need to have to believe that. Here's the bottom line. I don't know, you don't know, we don't know who this man is, and we don't need to know who it is. So that leaves us with the question then, well, why is it here? Why is it included? It could be here, and this is just my guess, it could be here to show the fulfillment of what Jesus said earlier, that they would all flee. Maybe it's a contrast between what we saw of the disciples early on. Notice in Mark 1 and verse 18, at once they left their nets and followed him. And down in verse 20, without delay he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. And the contrast there is when the disciples began to follow Jesus, they left everything behind to follow him. And what we're seeing in this particular case is somebody leaving everything they have behind, which is their linen garment, to flee from him. I mean, totally opposites. I think the main point is Jesus is now utterly alone. And they're going to lead him to a kangaroo court in the middle of the night. And again, we'll talk about that next month, Lord willing. So this happened very early Friday morning. I mean, we're talking after midnight, in the wee hours of the morning. And just imagine how amazing this is, that from the time that he's arrested, he's going to be dead by 3 o'clock this next afternoon. And what we see in everything that happened and what we read here, it's just abounding with fulfilled prophecy. And I guess, what we saw in Gethsemane with Jesus sweating drops of blood and the fear and the terror and horror of that time that he was there, what I see now with Jesus is a total lack of fear. His life is in the hands of God. His will now is to do the will of the Father, and that's going to take him all the way to the cross. And listen, I have to just tell you that everything that he endured out of love for us and for all mankind. And the amazing thing about this to me is that the benefit of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection and ascension is still available to us. I get newspapers, and every once in a while in the mail we'll get packages of coupons, for percentages off or money off. And if I look at the bottom, what am I going to find? An expiration date. This is only good until such and such a time. This offer of Jesus for salvation, freely given to you, is good until he comes back again. It's a standing offer that he's giving to us. It's an offer of amazing grace. Listen, I just got one question, and it's the same one that Ananias asked Saul. Now, what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord. That's his offer. Salvation. The song Mike chose is "Where He Leads Me, I Will Follow." Through the garden, through the judgment. I don't know if he's going to sing all those verses or not, but he's calling you. He's asking you to follow him. And it will be the best decision you've ever made if you'll do that. If we can help you with that, please come forward while we stand and sing.